Welcome to Next Game's A Guide to Ninja series. In this episode, we will go over the Ninja DPS spreadsheet and how to use it. This spreadsheet is maintained by Langley on FFXI.com. A link to the post will be in the description of this video. Now, the spreadsheet allows you to easily determine differences in gear for your TP and weapon skill gear sets. I find it most useful when comparing what I call secondary stats, things like attack, accuracy, and strength. These things obviously make a difference in our damage, but it's hard to do direct comparisons to primary stats, such as store TP and multi-attack in TP sets, and weapon skill damage and stat modifiers in weapon skill sets. The spreadsheet is also very useful in determining when a set is becoming less effective due to things like no longer hitting the accuracy cap. It's also probably the easiest way to show how the best in-slot gear changes dependent upon situation, so we'll use some time in this video to go over that as well. The first thing we need to do is download the spreadsheet. Please follow the link in the description and it will bring you to this site. Now, if you haven't been here before, this is a wealth of information in regards to Ninja and how to play the job, so definitely go over this information when you have the time. For right now, go ahead and scroll down to the very bottom of the first post till you see this DPS spreadsheet link right here. Click on that, please. This will automatically open up the Ninja DPS spreadsheet. Now, we don't want to modify it here because I want you to be able to make changes to it and save those. So go ahead and click on the download button up there in the upper right hand corner and then on download so it downloads to your computer. After the file is downloaded, go ahead and open it up in your standard spreadsheet viewer. If you don't have Microsoft Excel or a spreadsheet viewer, you can download OpenOffice, which is a free Office application that will allow you to modify this file. Now, depending on the application you use, it may warn you that this file originated from the internet and asking if you want to enable it for editing. The answer is yes, because you do want to make changes to this file. Now, once it's opened, you will see 8 different tabs here. Now, a lot of people are going to scroll through these tabs, maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed and not really sure what they're going to do here, and close it up and say, this isn't for me. Now, my goal here is to try and explain what all of this does so that pretty much anyone can hop in here, use this spreadsheet, and actually get meaningful information out of it. So whenever you download this spreadsheet from scratch, there's a process I suggest you follow to make sure it's going to work for you properly. The first part of this process is to understand that the spreadsheet you download may be different from what you're about to see on my screen, because by the time you view this video, the spreadsheet may have changed. This is okay because of what we are about to do in Step 2. In Step 2, we zero out all of the buffs and bonuses. This is the process of removing any buffs that may have been added by previous people when they were doing their calculations. After you've done that, you now want to enter your current TP and weapon skill gear sets into Set 1. After you do those 3 steps, you are now ready to start your comparisons. Let's go ahead and do the zero out process and then enter our gear so that we can get started. Let me show you how that works. So as we zero everything out, I want to go ahead and explain also what each of these tabs does, so it becomes a little less confusing to people how to work with the overall spreadsheet. The first tab we're going to talk about is the Stats tab. Now, this quite simply gives the spreadsheet the intelligence of the different stats that the different races and jobs have. Now, you should never have to modify anything in this tab, so just go ahead and scroll to the top of it and leave it alone. The next tab we'll talk about is Other List. Now, this is where the spreadsheet gets intelligence for things like the food stat bonuses and what we get for those, weapon skills and their FTP numbers. We also have things in here like the mobs we go against and their stats so that we can compare them effectively against our gear sets. We also have set bonuses in here. And it looks like the last thing we have in here are our job points and the job gifts and exactly the different stat bonuses that those will give us so that we can actually get all of this calculated correctly in this spreadsheet. Looks like we've also added dias and their associated values at the end there as well. Just like with the Stats tab, there should be no reason for you to ever change anything in this tab. Langley has already set everything up correctly, and it's good to go for our calculations. The next tab we'll talk about is the Gear List tab. Just like it sounds, this is where you'll find all of the weapons and gear that we'll be able to define in our gear sets. Now, Langley has painstakingly gone through here and added all of the weapons and armor that a ninja can pretty much possibly wear so that you can get all of the different gear calculations done that you want. However, in the future, it's possible a new piece of gear will be released that hasn't quite been added to the spreadsheet yet. If that happens, I suggest you go onto the forum post that you had downloaded the spreadsheet from and post that you would like to have this item added. I'm sure Langley will get to it as soon as he can. However, if he's not getting to it, or if you want to just try and add it yourself, I went ahead and added the Imperial Hairpin +1 here, just to kind of see if it would work, and it did. You just want to make sure that, of course, you would add this in the head section, and alphabetically, right where it should go. And I was able to do my calculations with that piece and get the numbers I needed. Now, I did want to emphasize that I do not recommend you add pieces in here. You definitely want to recommend in the form that they are added officially, because even if you add these in here yourself, well, the next time you download an update, you're going to have to do this all over again. So really, this is just a temporary measure in the event that a new piece of gear is added to the game, and you want to see how it affects one of your sets. Otherwise, definitely do not touch any of the things in the gear list tab. Now let's briefly talk about the next two tabs, melee and weapon skill. Each of these tabs is simply doing all the calculations in the background for our melee and weapon skill rounds. You definitely do not want to change anything in either of these tabs, and if you're trying to see behind the scenes what's going on, I find that the data tab is more beneficial than these two to kind of see what the overall consensus of these two tabs is. The next tab we're going to talk about is the data tab. This tab can be quite useful in determining just why or how a certain set is outperforming another one. This is where we're going to see the output of all of our two sets and the damage numbers and DPS numbers that those lead to, and this would help us to, of course, determine exactly why one is underperforming compared to another. Now, the four main columns you want to look at are this TP set 1 and TP set 2, and weapon skill set 1 and weapon skill set 2. Now, everything in those two columns will relate to how that set performs in that specific department. Now, when you see hand 1 there on the left-hand side, that means for our left hand. So if we scroll down all of these numbers, lines 111 and 112 are really important when it comes to our hit rate or how accurate we are being. We always want this to be as close to 99% as possible. Obviously, if we're only hitting 80% of the time, our DPS is going to substantially suffer. As you can see here, hand 2 is calculated separately, and this is, of course, our right hand swings and how accurate those are, which is reported right here in hit rate as well. Likewise, if we scroll down further, we can see that there is a throwing section, which will help us to determine just how often those Dakin throws are getting through. Here we also have a raw hit rate and a hit rate section that will show us just how often those are hitting. Additionally, if you scroll down further, the other modifiers section can show you some important stats that you can't otherwise get. This is a great place to get things like your total crit rate for both your weapon skill sets and your TP sets. Now, there are literally hundreds of other stats that are on this page. I just kind of briefly touched on a few. So obviously, if you wanted to delve into things further, you can definitely go into each one of these stats to get a better idea of how each one of these is performing. I just kind of went over the ones that I have found lead to the most answers in regards to differences. We have now covered 6 of the 8 tabs in the spreadsheet and not had to change anything. Now let's go ahead and break into the setup and gear tabs where we'll actually be making all of our changes. We are now going to skip over the gear tab and go to the setup tab. Now this is the most important tab in the entire spreadsheet, as it tells the spreadsheet all of the buffs that we have on us. This is where all of the zeroing out needs to happen to make sure that we are getting accurate results. Let's go ahead and start in the top left, and we'll work our way through the spreadsheet. Let's go ahead and select the race drop-down to begin with. Here, obviously, select the race that you are for your character. That way you can get the most accurate results possible. Next, for your level, obviously this should always be level 99. Next, for your sub-job, there's only 2 options available, Dancer and Warrior. And for TPS, you're pretty much always going to want Warrior. Now for your food, here are all the food options available. Now you're going to notice many of the +1 options missing, but you should be able to find most of the foods that you would use in here. The next section we'll talk about is the merits. Now this is extremely important to make sure you get this right. Make sure whatever merits you have are matched here. Now I have all of the ones you see here, 15 in each of the stats, 5 in a critical hit rate, but I did not have 5 Sange, so I took that away. I have 8 into each of the weapons, so that gives me 16 skill, and 5 for Blade Shun. Next, it's important you give an accurate accounting of your job points. Obviously, if you're mastered, leave 2100 here. However, if you only have 500, for instance, make sure you enter that, because as you can see, it does drop your DPS by about 200. You will see a spot for in effect right underneath job point total. That is how many job point levels you have into the in effect. So if you have all 20, make sure you leave 20 there. If you have any less, make sure you alter that. Next is what weapon skills you'll be using for both set 1 and set 2. Now, since we're comparing the two sets, we always want to make sure that the weapon skills between the two are the same. That is, of course, unless we're comparing weapon skills. So in this case, I set both to blade high. Now it's important to know that, for instance, if you have a Kanagi, now you're normally going to have an Aftermath 1 effect in play. This means you would normally have a 30% activation rate on your occasionally does triple damage, so therefore you want to put 30% in that first column. However, if you were actually intending on having AM3 up most of the time and you want to kind of see what difference that makes to your damage, you would change that to 50 to reflect the occasionally triple damage rate that you would get if you have Kanagi AM3 up. Now if we go ahead and change this to Blade Shun, now of course we're not going to get access to either of those buffs. So then we would go ahead and zero out that column. Likewise, if we had a Kokoku, we would go ahead and put a 1 here in this column. And if we had a Nagi, we would go ahead and be able to use AM2 and AM3 if we happen to plan on having those active at the time that we were testing the particular gear set. So make sure that you always have the proper weapon skill set here and any AM benefits that you expect to be getting at the time you're testing this set. Let's go ahead and move on to our next set of columns. Now you can see I am turning in and off now by taking it from a 1 to a 0. I am doing the same for Kaka Ichi. Just to be perfectly clear in case I wasn't, 0 means it's off, 1 means you plan on having that boost on at the time. Berserk, we're doing the same thing, making it 0s instead of 1. Same thing with Aggressor. After that, go ahead and check Abysia and make sure that it does not have a 1 saying that you're in Abysia, and make sure there's not a 1 saying that you're in Void Watch. You also want to make sure that you have 0s for Ionis and Aldulin, and that the day for the FTP bonus is also both at 0. Next, let's go ahead and move on to our next columns. Here's where we deal with lots of the buffs other party members will give us. We want to go ahead and turn off Haste 2 as it's on here. As you can see, they were also planning on having Dia 4 on the mob. Let's go ahead and turn that off. As you can see, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 option when it comes to Dia, so you can actually select which Dia version you would plan on having on the mob, which is quite helpful. Additionally, we have boost here for White Mage, Summoner, Scholar that are all at 0. If they weren't, we would want to make them 0. Dancer is also at 0. Now Bard is usually where you're going to find people making a lot of changes and a lot of 1s in here. Go ahead and turn all these to 0s like you've been doing. And please note, this is true even if you intend on turning these back to 1s. I always think it's important to get a good baseline of exactly where your gear is at, and then go ahead and turn these on to see what differences it makes as opposed to the other way around. After finishing up turning off all of Bard songs, go ahead and move on to Corsair and turn off all the Corsair roles as well. Then go ahead and work down to Geo and make sure those are all 0s as well. It looks like we had both Frailty and Fury up in this instance. So at this time, we should have now changed pretty much everything on this page to 0s, and it should look like you're seeing before you right now. If your page looks any different, go ahead and make changes to yours to make it look like this, and that will be proper zeroing out of this sheet. Next, let's go to the bottom left of this sheet, because there's a section that I'm sure some people will have questions about. It is the Combined Results section. Now originally the designer of this spreadsheet had thought that you would be in set 1 for a period of time and set 2 for a period of time, and he wanted to get the combination of those two sets. So therefore, with this math, he planned on being in set 1, roughly 1/3 of the time, and set 2, 2/3 of the time. So that's why set 1 has the ratio of 100, and set 2 has the ratio of 200 for a total of 300. Now, I don't use the spreadsheet in this fashion because I'm actually use my spreadsheet to compare set 1 to set 2, but just know that if you wanted to use the sheet in a different way, that is what this Combined Results section is for. Now the last part I'll draw your attention to on the Setup tab is definitely one of the most important pieces on this tab, and that is your target in the upper right hand corner. Now this is what will tell the spreadsheet what target you're planning on running these test results against. Now normally we have Apex bats selected here because I find that's a good test measure. But obviously if you wanted to measure yourself against much more difficult prey, you go ahead and put this all the way up to Warder of Courage, which is a good example of how you would perform on things like Wave 3 Dynamis D material, and of course on Warder of Courage. Likewise, you can go all the way down to Even Match and even Easy Prey to see how you would operate on those as well. Let's go ahead and put this back to Apex Bats and move on to the next and final tab, the Gear tab. Now obviously the Gear tab is mostly self-explanatory in that you just input the specific gear for the sets and see what the output of DPS is. However, there are a few specific things to keep in mind, so let's go through this first setup one by one. First, let's go to TP set 1, and change it to the katana that we're going to use. Now all the katanas that should be available are in here, and in the case of something like a Canaria, we do have a triple attack and an agi plus triple attack in here, but there's also ones that actually have yours and yours too listed. So if you have your own augment, you can go into the gear list tab underneath the weapons and change the specific stats that it's giving you. So for instance, you would erase triple attack 3% and possibly make it so that it gives you 5% crit rate, or 5% critical damage rather. Either way, you can put in your specific augments for your Canaria both in rows 19 and 20 to kind of get the different ideas of what those can do. So that's going to be it for Canaria. Let's go ahead and talk about the augments for the different Rima weapons, because they can also come into play here. You want to make sure that you only have the AUG weapons, that is where it says AUG after the title of the weapon, in the main hand slot. In the offhand slot, you want to use the versions that do not have AUG after the title. Otherwise, you're going to be getting that bonus in your offhand when you don't get that in the game. Likewise, for the Fudo Masamune, either select A or B when it's in your main hand, but when it's in your offhand, always select no augment, as you are not getting any of those benefits when it's in your offhand. Additionally, if you don't have R15 weapons, don't plan on actually using the Augment 121 weapon. Go ahead and set up for the weapon that you plan on achieving so you can get accurate DPS numbers. Now the only two weapon types that we can allocate for in this spreadsheet are dagger and katana. So if you want to use a Tourette or a blurred +1, you can select that column right there to change to that weapon type. Now for the rest of this stuff, just go ahead and put in your regular TP gear set. For each one of these slots, you should be able to find the piece of gear that you want to put in there. Now, while I go through that underneath the TP set 1, let me call your attention to column X. Now this is a useful column in quickly determining whether or not you're using the same piece of gear in both set 1 and set 2. This is just a nice easy way to determine whether or not your gear sets are the same or there are differences between them. Look for that red dash line to know that there is a difference between the piece you're using in set 1 and set 2. Now when you're first setting this up, what I suggest you do is go ahead and take your standard TP set and fill that in TP set 1. Take your standard weapon skill set and fill that in weapon skill set 1. Then go and put those exact same two sets in TP set 2 and weapon skill set 2. The reason you do this is twofold. One, it gives you a nice easy base to start with so that you can very easily modify pieces in set 2 and immediately see what the difference is between that set and the set that is very close to it, which would be set 1. The second reason you do this is because at the end of all of this zeroing of the spreadsheet, all of these numbers between set 2 and set 1 should match. If after you put all of the same gear in those two sets and the same weapons, they don't match, you know you've made an error some way. So it's also kind of a check on your work to make sure you have properly zeroed everything out. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward in this video to the point where we have set 1 looking the exact same as set 2 in regards to the gear that we are using. As you can see here, we have equal signs all the way up and down column X, meaning that all of the gear is the exact same. We're using the same weapons as well. Yet we have almost a 200 DPS difference. What could be causing this? So we go back to our setup selection to kind of see how does set 2 have more power in it than set 1. As you can see right down there underneath the Geos section, we have Fury that is currently enabled for set 2, and it's not enabled for set 1. I don't see anything else in here that's a difference, so obviously that must be what's causing it. My goodness, that Fury definitely does add a substantial amount of DPS even at this level. Now let's go ahead and go back to our gear, and as you can see now, our weapon skill damage and set DPS damage numbers are identical, so we now have zeroed everything out and have an even playing field. We can now finally start playing with the spreadsheet and seeing what different gear sets can do. For our first example of how to use the spreadsheet, I will discuss weapons. Now I won't be addressing the Rima or SU5 weapons in the main hand in this video, as I will shortly be releasing a video on each one of them and where those excel. However, one of the most common questions I get is, what sub-weapon should I use? So let's use this time to delve into that a little bit and see what the spreadsheet says. So I'm going to start by showing you the setup screen to show you that we have all of our buffs turned off. This is just a standard mastered ninja with no food that we are using this first test on. Now that we go over to the gear tab, you can see that I'm using my regular Kendut Saba +1 set as our TP set. I have my usual Blade Shun gear set for the weapon skill gear set. We're using the Hishi Shiroken at R15 as my main weapon. And for my sub-weapon, we're using a dagger, which is a Tourette. As you can see, this gives us almost exactly 600 DPS with these buffs. Now this is my favorite weapon and gear set combination to use, but it excels at magic burst damage, and skill chain and magic burst damage is not calculated in this spreadsheet. So there should be a few other katanas that are better than this. Let's go ahead and take a look at those options and see what they are. Before we start to delve into the katanas, let's just take a quick look at the other dagger options and just kind of see how they compare. First, let's look at the Turnian +1. As you can see, that's a DPS hit of about 60. Looks like switching to the Odium is a DPS hit of about 70. And wow, the Blurred one is almost a hit of 75 DPS over the Tourette. And as you can see, the other options here really aren't any better. So we can definitely determine that there is no better dagger to use than the Tourette. Let's go ahead and switch to katanas and see what some better options are. Now let's go ahead and go alphabetically here. The first one we're going to go to is the Achi. As you can see, this is only an 8 DPS hit compared to our Tourette, so it's actually pretty close to it. Next, let's go to our Fudo Masamune with no augment. Wow, a 42 DPS improvement. That is substantial. Now I'm going to go into exactly how and why we get these improvements shortly, but let's keep going through these katanas to see how the others perform. The next one we'll discuss is the Gokatai. As you can see, this is actually giving us a 16 DPS increase over the Tourette, so that's fantastic. And again, we will delve into just why the Gokatai is pulling ahead here right after we go over the katanas. The next katana we're going to discuss is the Canaria with a Dex and max triple attack boost. So this is 15 Dex and 3 triple attack. As you can see, it performs just slightly worse than the Gokatai at 615 DPS. The next one I'll show you is just the Canaria with Agi and triple attack on it. So this is basically swapping the 15 Dex for 15 Agi. As you can see, doing so gives us a hit of approximately 9 DPS compared to its Dex counterpart. The next one we'll go over is the Ochu. As you can see, it gives us just slightly better DPS than the Tourette at 2 additional DPS. Now the Racho +1 drops our DPS all the way down to 562. Now this is a good example of what basically all the other katanas in the game are going to do and why you, for a large part, don't even want to consider them. Let's go ahead and move on to the Shigi. That's going to lower our DPS to 584, so that's even going to give us a 16 DPS hit over the Tourette. The Kujaku +1 gives us a huge hit down to 543. Please keep in mind the haste buff you get from this is not taken into account, so that would help its damage. And it looks like the Taka actually performs fairly well at 602 damage, right there alongside the Ocho and just slightly ahead of the Tourette. So many people would look at this and go, wow, that Fudo Masamune is really above and beyond destroying everything else, so that should be the clear winner here, and you really should never use anything different than that. And I really can't argue with that logic too much. As you go through and do various tests with buffs you have in gear sets, you're going to find that the Fudo Masamune is almost always at the very top of this list. However, I have to keep in mind that not everyone can afford a Fudo Masamune, and we also have to remember that the Gokatai and Tourette will both give you better magic burst damage if you use them, usually to 1,000 to 3,000 more damage per magic burst. So if those are in any way close to the Fudo Masamune, they're actually going to pull ahead in overall DPS. We can also clearly see here that the Canaria with the max Dex augment and max triple attack augment actually is right there with the Gokatai in regards to overall DPS. Now again, when you include things like magic burst damage, this is going to fall very far behind the Gokatai, Tourette, and Fudo Masamune. But if you were just going for a straight weapon skill damage DPS set, the Canaria with the Dex and triple attack augment is definitely a viable option. So in this specific scenario, I would say that Fudo Masamune, since it's so far ahead of the rest, would definitely be your best option for overall damage. However, let's go ahead and change just one small thing and see how that changes all of these results. Now I know from experience and all my parsers that you're usually flirting with the accuracy cap when you're fighting these Apex spats. So I'm curious exactly what would happen if we simply add a squid sushi to help with our accuracy and ranged accuracy. Let's see what kind of change that makes to which weapons we choose for the sub-weapon slot. Now that we've added that squid sushi, let's go back to our gear tab and see what's happened to our DPS. As you can see, the DPS for our Tourette has gone from 600 to 647, Obviously an increase of 47 DPS. Now almost all of this increase in DPS has come from the fact that we were not accuracy and ranged accuracy capped before we had that squid sushi, and now we are. Let's see what difference it's made to the other weapons. As you can see, the accuracy's made a big difference in all the daggers, as many of them are now much closer to the turret and overall DPS than they were before. Now, still, the turret is the one that you're always going to choose, but it does actually show that as you add more accuracy, just how close some of these can get. Let's go ahead and move on to the katanas now. Now, just like with our daggers, the accuracy boost is going to substantially affect our DPS, and it's actually going to change which one of these katanas is best in different situations. So let's go ahead and go through them now and see exactly where they lie in regards to the original list that we created. As you can see, the Achi is now taking almost twice the hit to DPS that it was taking before the sushi. The Fudo Masamune is now only 6 to 7 DPS higher than our turret option. And since that turret option is giving us 1 to 3,000 more damage per magic burst, if we are doing magic burst, it's definitely going to pull ahead. Let's go ahead and look at the Gokatai, which before was up by about 16 DPS on the turret. And now, as you can see, it's about 20 DPS behind where the turret was. Now, the main reason this happened was because the reason the Gokatai was pulling ahead before was because its accuracy was helping us, being that we have more accuracy with a katana than we do with our dagger, and its ranged accuracy was helping us, both of those increasing our overall DPS numbers. Now that both those items are capped with sushi, it's not nearly as useful. As you see, we can also now change to our Canaria with Dex and triple attack on it, and it's going to do substantially better than that Gokatai at 640 DPS. It's actually only a little bit worse than our turret option. As you can see, if we switch to that Agi option, it's going to drop our overall DPS by about 12 over that Dex option. Now, the last 4 katanas were previously at the bottom of the list, and they still remain there, but there has been kind of a reshuffling of them now that we have this increased accuracy. As you can see, the Ochu is now giving us 621 damage. The Ratio +1 is giving us 603. The Shigi is giving us 595. The main reason that fell so far is because the main reason we use that is for its accuracy. Therefore, since we don't need the accuracy anymore, it's not nearly as useful. The Kajaku +1 has now fallen to 583. And again, this is not taking into account the haste effect that you can get from this. That would boost that number a little bit. Now you should find that as you add all kinds of buffs in that setup tab, it's not really going to change the order that you see here on the right hand side after you have all of your accuracies capped. Truthfully, everything kind of stays pretty linear in regards to the buffs that you're getting after that point. So therefore, that right hand side after sushi is really what you should use if you're planning on your accuracy being capped against whatever you're fighting. This means that Fudo Masamune is always going to pull out a little bit ahead of the turret, but the turret's always going to pull out a little bit ahead of the Fudo Masamune when it comes to MB damage, making those really the 2 best options that you want to stick with. Honorable mentions definitely go to the Canaria with Dex 15 and triple attack 3% on it, as it's not too far behind those 2. The Achikupatu, because of its low delay, is also a viable option, but it definitely falls behind the other options as well by nearly as much as 20 DPS in this instance. I have to, of course, mention that Gokatai as well, as we clearly saw in the previous example that if accuracy or ranged accuracy is in any way a concern, it is going to pull ahead of that turret and still give you that great MB damage, so make sure you keep it in mind. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit on the sub-weapon situation. Let's go ahead and move on to another topic. For our next example of how we can use this spreadsheet, I'd like to show an example of how situational best-in-slot gear can be, and how the spreadsheet helps us determine what the best-in-slot gear is for each situation. Now before we can go ahead and see what situation different gear sets are good in, we need to create the situation. That's what you need the Setup tab for. So go ahead and switch to the Setup tab, and we're going to go ahead and enter all of the buffs that we're expecting to have for this first test. Now I would like to set up a test so that we have an idea of what we would have when we have our normal trust out. This means I'm not going to have food on, because normally when I have trust out fighting Apex bats, I don't have food out. Obviously if you do, you could make that change here. Now before we go any further, I do want to go over an important tip. Now I keep talking about reaching the accuracy cap and ranged accuracy cap and how important they are, but you may be wondering how it's possible to determine just how many points you need to reach that cap. Well, there's a lot of ways to do that in the spreadsheet, but this is the easiest way I've found. go here to column J, where it says ACC, which of course stands for accuracy. Go down to this custom row and just put in a number like 50 and hit enter. If your set DPS for that set goes up, then that means you actually weren't capped and you needed to add more accuracy in order for it to count. Now, as you can see here, we added 50 and our set DPS didn't go up, so we were accuracy capped. Let's check our ranged accuracy. As you can see, we added 50 ranged accuracy and our DPS went up by 7, so we definitely weren't capped there. Now, to find out exactly how much you need, go ahead and just start reducing that number of 50 until you actually get an amount that doesn't change your DPS. We just lowered it to 20 and it was still at that range. Now I lowered it to 15. Now you just kind of add between those two until you get a number that does not change your DPS. There we go. It looked like the number is 20. So in order to actually cap our ranged accuracy, we would need 20 ranged accuracy in this set. There are a number of other ways to obtain this information from the spreadsheet, but this is just the way I found most useful. Now go ahead and remember to remove that, otherwise it may affect your stats going forward. Let's go ahead and go back to the Setup tab and continue to set up the buffs that we have at this time. Now it's important that you actually put all of the buffs that you actually expect to have in for that situation. So if I'm going to be completely honest, I almost always have Yonin up because that's how I play. So let's go ahead and put Yonin there, because I normally am tanking. I almost always will also make sure that Kaka is up, so I can go ahead and put that in there as well. Now quite honestly, I very rarely use Berserk and Aggressor unless I'm just purely in DD and not tanking, so I'm going to assume that both those are off, so we'll skip those. Now because of Koromoru, I can only assume that Haste 2 is always going to be on me, and Koru is actually pretty darn good about making sure that Dia 3 is always in the mob we're fighting, so we'll go ahead and put the 3 in the Dia column. Now, go down to the Bard section, and either Ulmia or Joachim will always make sure that your March is capped. So I usually have Ulmia out, so let's go ahead and put 1s in both the March 1 and March 2. This will make sure that your magical haste is capped. So we have now recreated the standard situation of when you're just out playing, maybe in an ambuscade, or in this case, of course, against Apex bats. Now let's see what happens when we play with the gear. So with our situation set up and our usual gear in play in set 1, let's go ahead and alter set 2 and see what kind of changes we can get. Now the first thing I'd like to do is let's go ahead and change set 2 to what the best in slot is shown on the main FFXI webpage. Now normally this is the best in slot gear, but let's see exactly how it compares to our Kendut Saba +1 in this specific situation. Now you can see that for TP set 2 we have changed it to reflect the best in slot gear set for TP gain. And wait a minute, why is it that the set DPS is half that of my Kendut Saba set? Well, I suspect that this is accuracy related, and instead of actually getting to that answer the way I showed you a minute ago, let's get about it a different way. Go ahead and go to the Data tab, scroll down underneath the Hand section to the Hit Rate row, and as you can see, our accuracy is capped on the set 1, but we'll only have a 38.5% accuracy on set 2. Likewise, if we scroll down to the Hand 2 section, we have 95% accuracy on set 1, but only 38.5% in set 2. For throwing, 75% accuracy for set 1, and only 20% accuracy in set 2. So obviously, accuracy is playing a large role into these low numbers. Let's see what happens if we add a Sublime Sushi. That's better. As you can see, by simply adding a Sublime Sushi, we have now got our numbers to come all the way up to where they're only within 4 DPS of our Kendut Saba set. Let's go ahead and see what our accuracy numbers look like now. As you can see, our throwing accuracy is up to 58%. Our Hand 2 accuracy is up to 91.5%, so still not capped. And our Hand 1 accuracy is up to 91.5%. Again, still not capped. So let's go ahead and try and add some accuracy to this set and see what that'll do to our damage numbers. I know that Herc Dex triple attack piece isn't really adding much accuracy. If we swap that out for a Kendut Saba +1, that boosts almost 100 points to our DPS. And now, as you can see, caps the accuracy in the left hand, caps the accuracy in the right hand. And if we scroll down to throwing, you can see that sadly we only have a 75% hit rate here, but I'll say that's close enough. That being said, there is some more DPS to be gained here. Let's go ahead and go back to our gear section and see just how much. My guess is it's about 40 ranged accuracy that we're going to need. So let's put that in, and as you can see, that actually gave us a DPS boost of 43. Now if I put that down to a 39, we can see it still goes down. And if I put it up to a 41, we can see it stays put. So indeed, 40 does look to be the number that is appropriate for ranged accuracy that is missing in this set. Now I don't suggest you go hunting around for 40 ranged accuracy in other gear, but do keep it in mind with things like your food selection, because it means you'd actually get more benefit out of something like a Sublime Sushi +1. In this final example, I'm going to take accuracy entirely out of the equation and show you how the best in slot will still differ dependent upon the situation and dependent upon your buffs. Things like capping your PDIF and attack through major Bard, Corsair, and Geo buffs will entirely change the gear that you want to select compared to what you want to fight with when you have just your Trust out, for instance. Now I've noticed that when it comes to the TP sets, there isn't much difference in gear between having capped buffs as long as your accuracy is capped. However, there appears to be some large differences in what gear to use for your weapon skill sets dependent upon your buffs. Let's show you what I mean. So the first thing we have to do is make sure our spreadsheet is set up for the exact situation we're trying to test. For these tests, I'm going to go ahead and have Sublime Sushi on us just to make sure that accuracy is not an issue. We'll be using Blade Shun. That's also the weapon skill set we'll be testing. Now our set 1 is going to represent what it is like when we have just our Trust out and the buffs that we would have in that situation. And set 2 is going to reflect what we would have in a hyper buffed party situation when we have a Red Mage, Corsair, Bard, and Geo at our disposal. So in set 1, we have Yonin on and Kaka. We do not have Berserk or Aggressor active. Koru has given us Haste 2 and put Dia 3 on the mob. And we have 2 marches. This is basically capped our magical haste. This has created the situation that we would normally experience when we have our Trust out. Now in set 2, we have In and up instead of Yonin. Kaka is also up. We are not using Berserk or Aggressor yet. I'll get into that in a second. Haste 2 and Dia 4 are up thanks to our Red Mage. Now for our Bard, we have Honor March and Minuets up. And for Corsair, we have Chaos Roll and Samurai Roll up. And then for Geo, which gives us Fury. Now, set 2 should now have capped PDIF and capped attack. The best way to test this, I found, is just to go over there to the Berserk, which should be off, and turn it on. If your attack is capped, turning it on should not change your DPS numbers for set 2 at all, and as you see, it does not. So therefore, our attack is capped, and turning on Berserk does nothing. Now let's go ahead that we've set our situation up, and go to our Gear tab to make sure we can make the proper changes there and see what differences exist. Now the first 2 things I want to draw your attention to is I assured you accuracy and ranged accuracy would play no part in these calculations. So as you can see, I've artificially inflated our accuracy and ranged accuracy by 999 in each set, just to assure you that there was no accuracy issues here whatsoever. I've done the same with the accuracy in the weapon skill sets. Now what you see for TP set 1 and TP set 2 here is what is currently up as best in slot on Langley's webpage, and sure enough, that is normally best in slot. However, I actually have found 2 pieces here that we can eke a little more damage out of. For instance, if we go to the waist and change it from a Wind Buffet to a Salafi, it goes from 1780 to 1788, an increase of about 8 DPS. And if we go from our Herc triple attack boots, it goes from 88 up to 91, so an increase of 3. Now that's just a small difference, so it's nothing to write home about, but what it does show you is how the spreadsheet can help you determine those small differences between gear. Also, you'll see that if I go over to our TP set 2 and change those same items, we get increases there as well. This reflects what I was referring to in regards to the TP sets being fairly linear in regards to their gear swaps as long as your accuracy is capped. If you change a piece of gear when you're not buffed and it gives you an increase, then more than likely when you are buffed, it's also going to give you an increase. Now sadly, the same cannot be said about weapon skill gear sets. I have noticed a huge difference in regards to which gear you can use depending on the buffs you have. Let's go ahead and go over that now so I can show you some examples. Let's start with the ammo slot. If we take the Sea Pollug Stone and change this to a Voluspa Tathlum, you'll notice our DPS actually goes up by 8. However, if we make that same change over in DPS 2 with our capped buffs, our DPS actually ends up going down by 20. So, first example of it working well in one set and not in another. So let's go ahead and change that back on set 2 and move on to the next piece. Now for the headpiece, we're going to change this to an Adamar Path B high quality. You'll see this gives us a boost of almost 50 DPS with that one piece. However, making that same change in set 2 will lower our DPS by over 50, actually 60 plus. So definitely not a change we'd want to make there. Let's go ahead and set it back. Now for the neck piece. I changed that to fuchsia, and wow, it increases our DPS by almost 75. However, making that same change on set 2 will lower our DPS by over 100. Again, definitely not a change we want to make there. Let's set that back. We can skip over the earrings because these are the same regardless upon gear set. You want to use the odor earring during the day and the lugra at night, and then the lugra +1 augmented in the right ear. Now for the body slot, there's an interesting thing here. Let's go ahead and change the body to an Adamar Path B high quality. And you will see this gives us a nice boost of over 75 DPS again. Now when we go make that same change on set 2, you will see that actually surprisingly, it gave us a boost of 10 DPS. So we've actually found a piece here that is better than the best in slot on the page, so it looks like we may need to update that. Now let's go ahead and move on to our next piece. This will be the hand slot. We'll likewise change this to Adamar Path B. As you can see, we gained another 36 DPS or so by doing so. Let's make this same change in set 2. And you will notice that sadly we are back to it not having that same effect. We have lost about another 9 DPS. So let's go ahead and change that back to Kendut Saba. Now both rings, there's nothing to be changed there. Both those are accurate and there is no better ring selections dependent upon gear set. It's the same thing with the back and the waist. However, for the legs, we are going to change this to a Mochizuki +3 for an increase in DPS of almost 20. Now when you make that same change to set 2, it is going to dramatically reduce your DPS by over 100, so you definitely don't want to make that change there. So go ahead and change that back, and you can really see as we're going along here just how much of a difference we're making to our overall DPS. We only had 1791 before, and now by just making these few changes to our weapon skill set, our trust setup has gone up by over 250 DPS. Let's see what this last slot does. If we change the feet to Adamar High Quality B, that's going to boost our damage by over another 20 DPS. Like usual, if we make that same change in set 2, it is going to lower our DPS pretty substantially, so we definitely want to take that change off. So as you can see, we've actually changed 8 pieces of gear from the best in slot Blade Shun weapon skill set, and in doing so have gained an additional 300 DPS, and none of it has come from accuracy. So it once again just shows to emphasize that everything is situation dependent, and dependent upon those situations, that's the gear set you're going to want to be using. Due to everything I just went over, I recommend you have 2 Luas for your gear swap. One that you use only when you are fighting content when you are hyper buffed, and the other one that you use when you're fighting content when you have your trust out. This will help you make sure that you're always using the most efficient gear setup for your situation. Going to show you one last example, this time for Blade High and how its gear sets differ. As you see, we've changed our weapon skill to Blade High and activated AM3. Everything else in the setup sheet is the same as before. We've also gone ahead and changed our weapon skill set 2 to reflect the best in slot weapon skill set 2 from Langley's webpage. Now I will say we have 3 changes here that I want to point out. It looks like Langley hasn't possibly updated his Blade High set in a little while, so we do have a few pieces here that are different than what is shown on the page. He has a brutal earring shown, and as you can see, if we change it to the newer odor earring, it definitely gives us substantially more DPS. Likewise, that Salafi belt that keeps popping up, sure enough, does give us more damage than the Wind Buffet belt overall. Lastly, the Mochizuki +3 definitely gives us more DPS than the Mumu +2 listed on the page, so I've automatically made those 3 changes to give us our best ideal Blade High gear set when we have capped buffs. Now let's see how this gear set will change when we use non-capped buffs. Now I specifically wanted to show this Blade High gear set as an example because it does some interesting things. Let's start by changing 2 things I know will give us an increase. The Adamar HQ bonnet on Path B, and the Adamar feet on Path B. As you can see, this gave us an overall boost of about 15 DPS. Also, as you can see, if we make these same changes on our capped buffs set, we definitely lose a substantial amount of DPS, so it's definitely not something we want to do over there, and it definitely isn't best in slot over there. Now that we've made that change, let's try and see if we can get some more DPS out of a few other things. Let's go ahead and try and change our hands from Mumu to Adamar Path A. As you can see, that dropped our DPS substantially, almost by 50. Let's go ahead and see what happens if we change our Moo +2 ring and it be a begrudging ring. Well, again, we lost a bit of DPS there, so we definitely don't want to do that. Well, let's see what happens if we change our body from a Ken.Suba +1 to a Moo. Oh, there we go. We got a sizable boost there. That's great. Now look what happens if we change our hands to an Adamar Path A. We now, instead of losing a bunch of DPS, gain 7. Likewise, now, if we change that Moo ring to a begrudging, we gain another DPS. So it's just another example to show you that just because something doesn't give you a benefit or gives you a loss in one situation, doesn't mean it will in all situations. All of this gear together has to work together, and unusual things can happen when you combine different set bonuses and things like that, especially when it comes to Moo sets and Adamar because of those set bonuses. So make sure you thoroughly play with all the different configurations to make sure you get the ideal DPS. This happens to be the ideal DPS I have found for this situation, so this is the gear set I would recommend if you are using just Trust. And that's going to be it for the video on explaining to you how to use Langley's spreadsheet to find the best in-slot gear for your specific situation. I hope you found this helpful. Now, please understand that I did my best to explain my understanding of how everything works in this spreadsheet, but it is possible that I may have gotten a detail or two wrong. If I got anything wrong, I'll be sure to pin it in the top comment as always, so that you have the most up-to-date and correct information. I want to thank Langley for giving the Ninja community such a valuable tool and walking me personally through it when I struggled to get it working when I first started. It's become an essential tool for me to determine what gear to use in certain situations. In my next video of A Guide to Ninja series, I will be going into more detail on Blade Shun gear sets. Thanks for watching. Everyone stay safe and stay healthy.